So back to Friday, Richard Hart, and this is kind of the thesis of this episode that we're talking about here. He said, "Remember when Bitcoin went from 65K to 30K, while Hex did like a 20x? Remember when I called the top years ago? Bitcoin is a risk-on asset. Blah 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 blah." And we're going to get into more of what he said here, but what I wanted to focus on is that first part that he said, how in the last bull market, and that would have been from basically DeFi summer, the spring, April of 2021 until deep into the summer when we went from 65K down to 30K. And then, of course, we round tripped it back up to 69K or whatever in November of 2021. But Hex performing like that as Bitcoin goes down. Okay. Now, altcoins, and people have to realize what we're talking about right now is bull market mentality. This kind of stuff we're speaking of isn't happening yet because we're not quite there yet. But Bitcoin gets to an all-time high of 65K. As it pulls back and literally drops 50%, cut in half in the last bull market, Hex not only continued to go up, but did a 20x. Altcoins do tend to lag and then pump harder and longer than BTC after BTC has gotten where it needs to go. Hex did that in the last bull market to the tune of 20x. It was one of the best performers, obviously, in the last bull market. Could we see Hex do something like that again, as we get into 2024, maybe 2025, but next year? We've been in this depression for too long and people are looking for green candles here. Do you think we see Bitcoin, as it hopefully does reach somewhere near all-time highs and pumps hard deep into 2024? How do you think Hex behaves against it? And when Bitcoin does drop again in the bull market, how does this ecosystem perform? Can it continue to go the opposite direction of Bitcoin? Ewok.
Yeah. So a big thing that you really have to take into consideration is the liquidity pair, right? When that happened, I would say 80%, 85% of the liquidity was tied to the US dollar. With Bitcoin, it's tied with everything. So when there's a sell-off, that all kind of fades. Hex being as new as it was, and there were still people just buying, the pair was with the US dollar. So there was nothing that was also tied to Bitcoin that was bringing it down with it. So we really went the other way. So when a lot of people were saying how, what's the word I'm looking for? We weren't bonded to it at all. It was untethered, or what? I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but the liquidity pairs just weren't bonded together with Bitcoin. So it was help me out. What's the word I'm looking for? It was totally.
Sorry, I was answering Louis' question here in the chat. My bad.
Oh, that's okay. It doesn't matter. Anyway, we weren't tied to Bitcoin as much. We were tied to the US dollar. So it was unbalanced from that. So what we want to do this cycle is kind of see where that liquidity falls. I think things had shifted to where Hex was paired with more Ethereum than it was US dollars in the bear market. So it didn't affect it as much. The price of Ethereum staying steady kind of helped us hold it up there a little bit. If we had been just tied to the dollar like that, we probably would have dropped even further. So you definitely want to keep an eye on the liquidity pairs and see as things go up. Now, are we tied to the dollar? Are we tied to a lot of other things? Now, this ecosystem has grown so much, and there are so many things tied to it now that it could be a little different. I still think we're decoupled, though, as far as Bitcoin goes, right? A lot of the value still comes from Ethereum side, even onto PulseChain, because that's what a lot of the value that was bridged over, is tied to. So you still have to keep that into consideration. But there's a lot of other things the smaller things that can pump that have Hex pairs and PulseChain pairs that can also bring that up. So yeah, I think to answer your question, I think we can go the opposite way. It's a matter of how bullish this ecosystem and this community can be that doesn't really care what Bitcoin's doing over there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's really all about who's buying and who's selling. Once the markets start to take off, these people in this community are kind of focused on green candles. You get more buying, more buying, more buying. It doesn't really matter what's going on. When you see an overall market dump, that's when you need to get worried, because it becomes sentiment, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we can take off and decouple again, as long as those pairs kind of head back to the USDC side instead of the Ethereum side, you know, more prominently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And we have seen HEX throughout history move differently than BTC. We saw it obviously top out back in 2021, 2 months prior to BTC. It was in September, BTC did in November. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. We are not there yet. We're certainly not in bull market vibes, but things are, seeming better, obviously, the last couple of weeks. So we'll continue to monitor that.